All right. Hi, Miko. Hi, Mo. Thank you so much for joining me here today on Vonvo.com. Today is April 3rd, 2013, and we're here to discuss the recent developments which have been going on inside of Israel. I just want to go over two quick things before we get started. The first is that right now this conversation is being recorded, and after the conversation is completed, I'll be uploading this video to the internet to our YouTube channel. Is that okay with both of you?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great. And then the second thing that I want to make you aware of is here at Vonvo, we're all about our conversations staying both civil and valuable. We don't want there to be any personal attacks against one another, and we just want to give people a good show. So is that okay with both of you?
Absolutely.
Is somebody under the impression that he and I are on opposite sides or something?
No, this is the new disclaimer that you weren't put under last time you were here, Miko. That's all.
No, but I'm just saying. Yeah, okay.
All right, great. So, let's just get started with a quick introduction. So we have Miko here, Miko Peled, who is an Israeli and Palestinian peace activist. He is the author of The General's Son, and he's been on Vonvo once in the past, and he was born in Israel. His father has a background in the Israeli army. And he's going to be giving us that point of view. He's now, for the most part, pro-Palestinian. And then we have Moe Diab. Mo, I think that might be the first time I pronounced your last name. Was that all right?
Diab.
Diab, okay. And we have Moe Diab, who's a Palestinian-American human rights activist and writer with family living inside of Jerusalem. So now everyone knows who our speakers are. And why don't now we just sort of jump into the first topic which we were going to discuss today, which was just over a week and a half ago, President Obama was inside of Israel. He gave a speech in Jerusalem. He gave a variety of speeches. Overall, what was your impression, Miko, of the president's visit to Israel and what he may or may not have gotten accomplished? Can we ease our way into things with that subject?
Sure. I think the president made a. I think it was a successful trip if what he was intending to do was lose every bit of dignity that he had left, because the trip was a disgrace. He groveled in front of the Israeli leadership. He pretended to enjoy every minute of this disgraceful display of support of a country that he knows holds thousands of political prisoners, a country that he knows deprives children of water, of access to water because they're Palestinians, and a country that he knows that on a regular basis attacks Palestinian civilians intending to kill them just because they're Palestinians. And even though he knows all this, and I think we all can agree that the president knows all this, he went there to make this preposterous display of friendship, and I think if that was his intention, he succeeded, because that's exactly what he did. I think he shed himself of every little bit of dignity that he had left.
Right, and Mo, how about yourself?
I definitely agree with that. I think with whatever dignity he came with, he left without it. I feel he further destroyed the credibility of the American people. He went there not as someone who was trying to proctor peace on both sides. He started off his speech by completely glorifying Zionism, and it was a very backward speech. I put myself in the position of, if the speech was given to Palestinians and he was referring to Palestinians replaced the Jewish people with the Palestinian people, the speech would have also made sense, because he was very, very one-sided with his presentation. He spoke of a girl that he met that was the age of his daughters, and how she goes to bed every night scared of rocket attacks. What about the thousands of Palestinian children in the West Bank and in Gaza who don't know if they're going to wake up in the morning and have their entire neighborhood demolished? So I feel that it was very, very one-sided, and for him, in order for him to taken seriously between even the Arab Israeli citizens and the Jewish Israeli citizens, to the crowd that he gave the speech to, it would have had to have been a very balanced presentation. And like Miko said, he left without any of his dignity. But I believe the whole speech was made to describe and further show the control that 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 the Israeli government has over Obama to a certain sense,
Right.
because he really didn't say what an American president would have said.
Right. So, I mean, Miko, what kind of transitioning into that? I mean, control over America, or just the incredibly close ties America and Israel have. I mean, was that then ultimately just playing a huge role in the, in the verbiage that he was, communicating during his speeches? I mean, was it all leading back to that one single concept, everything that he really had to say?
Yeah, this whole claim that this had anything to do with peace is a lie. I mean, it's the biggest lie, and I think anybody that's aware and familiar with the situation knows it's a lie. This is this kowtowing to Israel is a result of it's the price of doing business in America if you want to have a career in politics. If you have a career in politics, whether you're a city council member, a state assemblyman, or the president, all the way up to the president, you have to periodically, on a regular basis, bow to Israel. And this is because Israel has a very strong lobby here. And I think people don't realize just how powerful, not so much in terms of its size, but powerful in terms of the years that it's been, that has been working here in the U.S. and the amounts of money and time that's been invested. The whole idea of Zionism, which is this absurd claim that says that all Jewish people have a right to live in Palestine because they're the descendants of the ancient Hebrews. This was sold, about 100 or so years ago to the powers that be in Britain and in Europe and in the United States by a small group of Jews who nobody elected, and they were very, very good at portraying themselves as white and European and civilized, which is why they were so successful in selling this absurd idea of Zionism. This was almost 100 years ago. Today's Israeli lobby are the descendants of those diplomats, of those people, of those salesmen. And they're selling the exact same nonsense, that somehow Jews have this right to live in that part of the world. Again, because of some connection they had with an ancient tribe that lived there thousands of years ago. So 85 years of experience is a lot. And they were able to, that's why they're able to influence the media and education system, and they've got a really strong hold on politicians here in America. Where, like I said, if you have any interest in a political career, then you have to bow to Israel, and that's kind of the price of doing business. And it goes all the way up to the president, and this whole charade of support for this country, which is is a really a brutal regime, a brutal non-democratic regime that holds half of its population as prisoners, was part of that. And this is the reality in politics here in America today.
And Mo, you've done this before. Feel free to chime off of anything which Miko just had to say.
Yeah, I mean, like Miko said, I absolutely agree. They had a lot of experience in Washington, D.C. After the Holocaust, the largest population, aside from Israel, moved to the United States. I believe there's about 1 million Jews that immigrated to the United States. So they've had an overwhelming presence here, and they've had the time to become successful and to work their way into Congress and into media. And unfortunately, journalism is not what it used to be. And journalism is used as a tool to control the perceptions of the American people, to gain support, to invade sovereign nations and support things that are very unjust, that are against the American principles. I think that something else that was really important to mention in the speech was 20% of Israeli citizens are Arab Israelis. So assuming that 1 out of 5 of the people in the room, or the students in the room watching, are Palestinians or Israeli citizens, Obama gave a speech that victimized the Jews throughout history and talked about their right of self-determination and talked about their resilience and talked about them being put in the face of terrorism and under constant threat. This couldn't be more true for the Palestinians. The Palestinians are locked in Gaza, they're occupied in the West Bank, and they're constantly humiliated, and the lives of the Palestinians have been made unbearable. So imagine sitting in the room as a Palestinian, listening to the President of the United States give this speech, not including you in this description, being victimized, of being resilient, or having the right of self-determination. The majority of the speech was, like Miko said, it was almost a promise to the Jewish state. And he spoke of democracy when Israel is not a true democracy. So I feel that, given what Rebbe had done, he stood up and spoke about it. I feel that he made some good points. And given that they claim to be a true democracy, having freedom of speech, I don't see anything wrong with him making that statement. I think the statements that he made were very important statements to make, because the reason for his visit was to encourage the peace process, when really it created a further divide on both sides and showed that what's the Americans side with.
Right. So, just Miko, do you have anything to follow up? Because I have just an interesting question I wanted to throw at each of you.
No, go ahead.
Okay, and also Miko, the one thing I was going to say, I saw a few people saying your volume was a little low, so maybe just speak a little bit closer to your computer if that's where your microphone is.
Sure.
So what I was going to say is the one thing that I noticed during the speech, and obviously Rabia, who appeared on Vonvo a week ago, brought this up, but I noticed that there was a lot of cheering whenever the Palestinian cause was brought up, whether it had to do with checkpoints during his speech and Palestinians being able to travel freely, whatever it might have been. From my understanding, when I watched that speech, I saw a lot of applause every time that he brought that up. And I wanted to maybe get both of your reactions to why that might have been and maybe what that means, because, ultimately you want to think that majority of that population inside that auditorium were Jews, and if they're going to applause, each time that it's brought up, it seemed like it was an applause like, yeah, we agree with what you're saying, Mr. President, about Palestinians be able to travel freely and having their own state. So can you guys just go into what your reaction would be towards that, and tell me if you agree or not with that assumption or with that observation?
I think it's all relevant. 40 minutes or 35 minutes of the speech, the majority of it was pretty much praising Zionism, praising all the accomplishments of the Jewish state, its democracy, and really building it up to a point where he could have said just about anything, and he had them on this roll of applause. They were applauding pretty much everything he said, glorifying Israel and their policies, and everything they've accomplished. So towards the very end, when he said, okay, well, it also is right, if it's okay for the Jews to have a state, it's okay for the Palestinians to have a state, it's only right. I think that's the only thing that he really said that may have gotten some kind of applause. But you have to understand that there are Israelis, Jewish Israelis, that are for independent Palestinian state too. There is a large misrepresentation in the Israeli and the U.S. media that all Israelis don't want a one-state or state or don't want peace. In reality, there are many Israelis and Jews that want peace. But the media wants to paint this perception that these two populations can't coexist and just absolutely hate each other. And he even made a statement in his speech saying, how can Israel live side by side with a population that hates them and wants to erase them off the map? So I think it's all relevant to the progression of speech.
Right, and Miko?
Yeah, first of all, I'm trying these earbuds, so let me know if you can
you're
hear me
good.
better, because somebody was...
Sounds
better?
good.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, Israelis live in this illusion that they can, on the one hand, go to elections and vote for Netanyahu and Yair Lapid and all these, chauvinist racists who will have nothing to do with the Palestinians and have no desire to reach an agreement ever. On the one hand, and then on the other hand, say yes, we like peace. We think Palestinians should have a freedom to live and as in peace and to travel and so on. But these Palestinians, what are you going to do? They're such terrorists that our security forces have to deal with them in such a brutal way. It's this hypocrisy that Israelis have gotten used to, and I know it's dangerous to generalize. But when you look at the results of the Israeli elections, you can't help generalize. And I think those applause demonstrate that. On the one hand, they love hearing what a wonderful relationship the United States have with Israel and what a wonderful democracy Israel is, and how much we want those Palestinians to live in peace and how much we really want the Palestinians to be happy. And then when they go to the elections, they vote for these chauvinistic racists who have absolutely no intention of making peace. I think the problem is that all of these well-wishing Israelis, or many of them, are still stuck in this Zionist point of view, which says Israel gets to call the shots. But only the Palestinians would agree to negotiate with the people that we want to negotiate as Israelis. And if they would only agree to accepting the limits on autonomy that we're willing to impose on them, and if they'd only agree to the tiny little places, tiny little areas within the West Bank that we are willing to give them autonomy, why then everything will be fine. But these Palestinians, they just won't agree. They don't want to surrender. And that's the problem. Because Palestinians don't want to surrender, then this beautiful, smiling, peace-loving face of Israel is suddenly, pushed aside, and Shabak, which is this Israeli internal, security service, and the Israeli military, and so forth, have to do what they have to do. And what does that mean? That it means, all these horrific, brutal crimes that they commit against Palestinians. So I wouldn't really bank on the fact that the Israeli students clapped when the president talked about freedom for Palestinians and freedom to travel and so on, because they want the world to think that they're good people and they believe in this. They just don't want to do anything in order to accomplish this. And this is why Peace Now and that entire peace camp that used to exist in Israel shriveled and died, because it was based on a Zionist premise that Israel gets to call the shots.
Right.
Yeah, I
Go ahead,
definitely
Mo.
agree with that. Something else I want to add too is that in the political discourse, in the public eye, Israel has come to the table and requested peace talks. But behind the scenes, what people don't realize is the Israeli negotiators, they come to the table with 14 preconditions prior to even agreeing to a peace talk. One of those, actually two of those, are they have to denounce violence and they have to recognize Israel's right to exist. Now, that all sounds good, but Israel refuses to denounce violence, and that's one of the preconditions. And they refuse to recognize the Palestinians' right to exist and self-determination. And those are within the 14 preconditions. So in the media, it does sound great, and their public is highly misinformed. So when you have a misinformed public, that is what their truth is. And, we've seen this all throughout history, the power of media and what it can do to a public and how it can shifts in the norms.
Right. Okay. Great. And so, the one thing that I'm just seeing in the text chat that a few people are bringing up, and it looks like we have another participant, but ultimately the one thing that, some people are bringing up is the idea of, okay, so you guys are saying that Israel's not a democracy, but what should people make of, the Palestinian-led, governmental authorities? Should people think that those are democracies, or how should people look at that? Would you mind maybe addressing that? Because some people are bringing up that point inside the text chat.
Yeah, somebody asked if I would be happy if there was no Israel.
Yeah.
Which is a good question. Seriously, I think it's a good question. You cannot compare the Palestinian Authority to a state. You cannot hold it to the same standards as a state because it's not a state. And I'm not going to judge them one way or the other, whether they're good or bad, but the reality is that the Palestinian Authority has less authority than a small city council. The Palestinian president can't go anywhere without the approval of the Israeli army, and it's a permit that has to be renewed, I think, every 3 months. We're not talking about apples and apples. We're not talking about two states. We're talking about a state that governs everyone, whether you're a Palestinian or an Israeli, and they govern people with different sets of laws. So if you're an Israeli Jew like myself, you live in a democracy. If you're a Palestinian, if you're an Israeli citizen but you're a non-Jew, which means you're a Palestinian, then there are dozens of laws that govern your life, that discriminate against you, laws in the law books. And on top of that, there's an entire racist and discriminatory atmosphere in Israeli society. And then, of course, Palestinians, the West Bank, and Gaza have no rights at all. They're under they're at the mercy of the Israeli military. So I think there's no question in my mind that Israel here is the problem. Israel has refused to do anything that even remotely suggests compromise that even remotely suggests peace. And if we look at a 65-year history of the state of Israel, we see that Israel has never intended to make peace with the Palestinians. Israel's intention was to destroy the Palestinians, take their land, and build a state for the Jews. They did that after 1948. They made it very clear, and then they finished the job in 67 when they took the West Bank and integrated it fully into the West Bank. There is no interest, there is no side, there is no Zionist party within Israel that has even the least or the smallest intention of ever negotiating with the Palestinians based on a real two-state solution, because everybody agrees that the vast majority of the settlements and the vast majority of the land that's been taken from the West Bank for Israelis only is part of the consensus. It's part of Israel.
Right.
So the only other solution, if we're talking about peace, if we're talking about changing the reality, is to get rid of Israel and to create a democracy instead. To have everybody go to the polls, to have every citizen equal, every person who lives there a citizen with equal rights, to respect everybody's civil rights, everybody's human rights, and allow for a real democracy with equal rights for everyone. So no, it won't be a Jewish state. It probably won't be called Israel. They'll call it something else, Palestine Israel or something. Who cares? But the point is that we can't pretend like Israel is a partner to peace when it's clearly shown that it's not interested in peace with the Palestinians.
Right.
Oh, okay. Well, my question is this. Like, I came from Korea. I currently came to U.S. and then I was watching CNN, NBC, MSNBC, all those U.S. mass media. How come none of the mass media mentioned Miko Peled? That's my question. Like zero. I mean, it's like the Soviet Union or it's worse than China in that way. I thought this is a country of freedom. They have a freedom to talk and all that. And I was schooling, Miko Peled does not fucking exist. How come this is possible in this country?
Well, Mo, do you want to answer that question? I mean, I'll just say that that's why we have Vonvo song, so that we can have people such as Miko and Mo on Vonvo to speak their minds. But do either of you want to talk about the media? Be my guest if you want to answer that, and then so much.
I think the reason is that Miko comes from a military family, and he can give primary resources and experiences from what he witnessed as a child growing up, and that makes him a credible source. So if he's put in the limelight, he's put on CNN, he's put on all these news stations, and he speaks from what he's actually seen, if that's pretty undeniable. He doesn't have any incentive to lie about that stuff. So it's going against our political discourse. It's going against our interests and what we want to accomplish. Media is no longer used as a form of journalism to spread the truth and information. It's used as a tool to gain more support for whatever the American government, Congress want to accomplish next.
And Miko, do you have anything to follow up on that, or?
Well, I appreciate Song's his passion about this issue, but I'm not the only voice that isn't heard. This whole aspect of the discourse, this whole side of the discourse, is not heard.
Right.
The people are talking and saying this, long before I have, including Israelis, including many Jews in America and around the world, including Holocaust survivors. I mean, this issue of the atrocities of Zionism and America's willingness to stomach this and the West's willingness to accept this is something that's bothering a lot of people. And so I'm not, I'm not the only one that's not being heard. But like you said, there's Vonvo and there are other mediums that are willing. And there's a line even among the liberal media in America. And I agree with Mo. I mean, media in America is really a form of entertainment. It's got nothing. It's very little to do with news. And there are a few people like Bob Simon and others who are very good, but it's few and far between. But there's a line even among the more liberal media outlets, and it's Zionism. Nobody will step beyond Zionism. Nobody will question Zionism. And again, this is a result of many years of very hard work by a very effective lobby. By Israel's lobby, which has been very effective.
Right. So, I mean, ultimately, what do you think that it's the media that is continuing to have a major stake in pushing conflicts like these, forward and not giving them a chance to actually be resolved? And does it ultimately come down to, average and normal people actually realizing this and speaking on, these alternative mediums, the Vonvos of the world, to actually talk about these conflicts, because this is really where you only tend to hear, maybe at this point, like truthful sides to conflicts as tense as these?
I don't know if that's the case. I mean, I would say that America has always been a very racist society. Today Americans are willing to stomach rights for African Americans, for Jews, Asians and Latinos are maybe number 2 or 3, but Arabs are too much. Arabs are bad guys, and that's the end of the world. The Arab world and the Muslim world, they're not part of this equation. So they're the victims. They have to suffer the brunt of racism in America and in the West in general now. That's kind of how what's been accepted. And I think the media has to work within the parameters of what the society is willing to hear. If CNN had somebody like me or Moe probably speaking and saying the things that we say, and people would just go berserk. I mean, it would cause some kind of, if the president or any major politician would meet with or hear or be willing to sit and talk about these issues from this particular non-Zionist point of view, then that would create too much upheaval for them to be willing to absorb. At the same time, I'll have to say that there is a change. I've been speaking a lot of campuses, and many faculty members come up to me and say, 4 years ago they wouldn't even let Jimmy Carter come and speak here, and his point of view is much much more pro-Israeli than mine. So there is a change, there is a shift, but it hasn't reached that point yet where mainstream media would allow it to air this.
Yeah, I'm going to say I agree with you when you say that, and I also want to add that social networking has definitely changed a lot of stuff, and it's allowed more information to circulate. The downside to that is we don't really know what's credible and what's not credible. But it does get the more information out that you wouldn't normally see on these mass media corporate news networks. And like public speaking, like you said, anyone speaking against Israel 20, 30 years ago, I mean, that didn't really exist even in debate. It was very censored. And there was only so much you could say before being called anti-Semitic. If you criticize Israeli politics, you criticize anything about the Israeli government, you're called anti-Semitic. The term has been used as a tool time and time again. So the media controls, regulates that, but I mean, it has become somewhat of a popular movement through social media.
Right. All right. So what I guess then what I'd like to then bring up next would be over the past 24, 48 hours, things might have seemed to be becoming a bit more tense over in Israel. And maybe Moe, you might want to start off. Would you mind just sort of giving people, bring them up to speed on over the past 24 to 48 hours what's been going on inside of Gaza?
Pretty much from my sources, there was somewhat of a revolt from in the prisons. A prisoner had died from cancer. He didn't get the proper treatment, and there was a lot of controversy about that on the streets and in the prisons. And the ceasefire was broken. Rockets were shot out of Gaza, and Israel with F-16s shot some missiles into an open field. I believe nobody was killed, nobody was injured. But I think the most important thing to identify here before discussing anything about this event is why this transpired in the history of the broken ceasefires. Is it Israeli self-defense, or are they provoking a larger scale attack? And if you look at the history of the broken ceasefires from 1949 all the way till last November, it's always been for some kind of political advantage, some kind of land grab, right after the elections, right before the elections. And I did a little bit of research, and I see that I believe it's Senator Kerry is going to be in Israel on Saturday to start discussing some kind of peace talks. So now what this does is it allows Israel to say, just yesterday, just a couple days ago, we had more rockets fire out of Gaza. We can't compromise this. And they add more preconditions, and they go further away from the green line about the land allocation. So I think it was more of a political move.
Miko, you mind chiming in on this? And then I have some other questions, obviously, to ask about it.
Yes, it's interesting. People actually treat quite often. They seem to treat Israel, the attacks on Gaza, as though they were kind of out of the blue, individual attacks. And there's always a reason, and the reason, of course, is always the Palestinians' fault. And I'm glad Mo brought the fact this is something that's been going on since the State of Israel was created. Breaking ceasefire agreements, violating ceasefire agreements, and attacking Gaza on a regular basis has been part of Israeli policy since the State of Israel was established, or since the Gaza Strip was established, which is a few years after the state was established. Israel has to attack Gaza on a regular basis, every so often, because in the absence of an attack, they would have to work on a solution. And a solution is something, of course, Israel doesn't want. A solution would mean letting the refugees go home. The refugees were thrown out of their homes, and their homes were destroyed, or sometimes not destroyed. And of course, Israel doesn't want to allow the Palestinians, the refugees, to return to their homes. So they have to attack, and they, of course, have to blame it on the Palestinians. And the problem with the media is that nobody is really willing to take a close look and see who did what to whom. They stop the conversation with, well, the Palestinians attacked, and so Israelis are retaliating. They never go beyond that. And even if the Palestinians did initiate the attack, can you imagine living in Gaza and just sitting there and doing nothing as a young person? I mean, as ineffective as the Qassam rockets are, and there was a picture in the Israeli paper of what it looks like when all these rockets fell on the ground, there's not even a hole, there's not even a crack on the floor. It's that ineffective. But it's something. So can you blame somebody for shooting rockets when you're stuck in that open air prison? And open air is really a bit of an exaggeration, because the air is not open. The air is controlled by Israeli helicopters and drones and F-16. But the thing is, the question that has to be asked and is never asked is, when will Israel stop? When will Israel stop brutalizing and terrorizing Gaza? When will Israel allow the people in Gaza to go home, the refugees to go home, and the people of Gaza to live a normal life? So I was just in Gaza.
Yeah. So Miko, can I ask you like a quick question on that? Like, pro-Israelis will say, whatever it was 4 or 5 years ago, we pulled all of our soldiers out of Gaza. So do you think that they made that move? Can you just elaborate on why they would make that move, but then continue terrorizing them? Like, was it a move where they were foreshadowing into the future of, okay, we'll pull our people out, but then we'll just keep attacking? Like, because ultimately that's what they'll say. They'll say that we pulled out our troops, and then we got rockets, just rained on us once we removed our troops. And do they have any sort of point whatsoever when they say that?
Well, anybody that says that is so ignorant that it's blinding. I mean, how can anybody say something so absurd? It's absolutely clear, and it was made clear by Israel from the very beginning. This was a unilateral move to pull out the settlers so that they can strangle Gaza more than they have been with the settlers. The settlers were in the way. That's why Sharon pulled them out, even using violence and the army and everything and all the screaming and shouting. The settlers were pulled out in order to allow Israel to strangle Gaza more. They were in the way. And like I started to say, I was just in Gaza in January. I was able to get into a tunnel, and it's staggering to see, on the one hand, all the pain and the suffering. You can barely see a family that hasn't lost loved ones. At the same time, the place is full of life, and you think the creativity and the ingenuity of the people who live there, any other people would have just died of depression. So you have to wonder, when will Israel really allow, or when will the world, because Israel will never allow it, but when will the world stand up and tell Israel to stop this terrorizing of Gaza, and stop with this nonsense of saying they say we gave them Gaza, and now look, we're getting Qassam rockets. Nobody gave anybody anything. They pulled the settlers out, and they implemented a siege, and now things are far worse than ever were.
Go ahead, Mo.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I also want to add to that, besides just having it as stalling the peace talks, creating controversy every year or so, every few months there, it's also a way to cripple that economy of Gaza. As you said, I mean, they have an economy there. They have a lot of things over there that have been built, and the economy's come a long way. So when they inflict $1.3 billion of damage in I believe it was the last attack in November, it's very hard to rebuild from that. It takes a few years to rebuild from that, and government buildings were destroyed, media towers were destroyed, many homes were destroyed. So you're limiting them, and you're also keeping it on the brink of a humanitarian crisis. So they're not allowing them to grow as a people, as an economy, and they're taking away their independence. And also, yeah, the reason that they pulled out their troops obviously was a unilateral reason. So in the world, it's the international community that's going to be the end to it, that's going to demand an end to it, and the United States has to be backing this as well.
Right. So I'm just looking through some of the questions right now, and what I was going to just basically ask, next is one of the things, and I'm going to look through questions afterwards once you guys respond to this question. But basically, like one article that I read earlier today said that Al Qaeda was taking partial responsibility for the rockets which had just gone into Israel. And so if that's actually the truth, ultimately, does Israel not have any right to retaliate if a terror organization such as an Al Qaeda is actually taking public responsibility for the recent rockets into Israel? Can you guys go into that?
We're both
Qaeda?
smiling.
Yeah.
We're both smiling. Go ahead, Mo.
Well, first we have to trace back the origins of Al Qaeda. When does Al Qaeda pop up in the media? It's when we need some kind of enemy, and it's been proven, it's been leaked through wires, that the U.S. has worked with Al Qaeda to fight the Soviets, so we have close relations with them. They popped in Syria, they popped up in Egypt, and now I didn't read the article itself, but I haven't doubted it at all. And it's just a deterrent factor. It's another reason to say, it's another reason to attack Gaza. I don't know why Al Qaeda would say that, or if they even did say that, it doesn't really make any sense from their preparation or organized crime or organized defense, or to come out and say we're responsible for this. Who's to prove that? If Hamas is governing their people and they didn't claim responsibility for it, why would the government pay? Why would the Gaza Strip pay?
And Miko, do you want to add anything to that? Because otherwise, I have a few questions here that I can throw at each of you.
I'll just say, I'll say one quick thing. I don't care if the Satan himself is shooting those rockets out of Gaza. Israel still does not have the right to attack people in Gaza. Israel is one of the most densely populated areas in the world, and Israel kills civilians in Gaza as a matter of policy on a regular basis. This is the issue. Who is shooting back or not shooting back is not the issue. I think it's immensely important to focus on the root cause. The root cause is the brutality of the Israeli terror attacks against the people in Gaza. That's what has to be discussed. And what the other side likes to do is they like to come up with all these nonsensical claims. Oh, it's Al Qaeda. Okay, then we all have to shut up because they said the word Al Qaeda. We all have to back off. Or they said the word Holocaust or anti-Semitic. They've got these code words that they think will cause us to bounce back and suddenly bow and shut up. It's nonsense. Who cares if it's Al Qaeda or the devil himself? Israel has got to stop attacking Gaza. Period. That has to be the issue. And the siege on Gaza has to be lifted immediately. Period. That has to be the issue.
Right. So Victoria inside of the text chat asked an interesting question that I'd like to hear both of your opinions on. She says Canada gives a lot of money to Palestine, yet the people never receive it. When will the PA and Hamas and Fatah be held accountable? Would you guys mind addressing that question to Victoria?
There's a piece in Haaretz this morning. There's a protest by older Holocaust survivors in Israel because the state took away their reparations and won't give it to them. And some of them are poor and suffering from malnutrition and are unable to go see the doctor because they are not getting their You show me a government that's not corrupt, and I'll give you, I don't know, anything you want. Certainly, there's corruption everywhere, and certainly, who knows, what levels of corruption are taking place in other places. Who gives? I think Canada is just like the U.S. As a matter of fact, it supports Israel more than it supports anybody else. Certainly, the Palestinians. But all these claims again once go back to blaming the Palestinians for something that they did wrong. Can there be anything worse than a country taking the reparations from Holocaust survivors and not giving it to them? And we're talking about the state of the Jews, supposedly, the so-called Jewish state. I think it's one of those nonsensical claims against the Palestinians that are neither have no significance one way or the other.
And I would also fact check what a lot of money is that's been from Canada, because I don't think that's true at all. And like Miko said, there's a great deal of corruption, and the people who need the money the most are the Palestinians in Gaza and throughout the West Bank. And that has been shown to be very corrupt, and they have now funds the Palestinian people. And like Miko said, also, it's what government isn't corrupt, but it's all relative to how much money is given to Israel, and it's relative to the proportion of the population. There are millions of Palestinians, and there are millions of Israelis living in the region. So when $3.2 billion of our humanitarian aid budget in the United States is going to Israel, strictly Israel, to the Israeli military occupation, to the military, and more money is coming along the way to build the settlements and to go to the Israeli population. So it's all relative. What is a lot of money, and what can be done with that money, and is money even getting into the right hands?
I'll say another word about the money. Israel doesn't need American foreign aid. Israel is a wealthy economy. It doesn't need the aid. So the aid goes only to allow Israel to build a bigger army. Let me just say one more thing.
Yeah.
The Palestinians, if the Palestinians were not living under these dire conditions because of Israel, they wouldn't need the money either. Palestinians would thrive. The Palestinian economy would thrive if it wasn't for limitations placed upon them by Israel. So none of this money is really needed, or wouldn't be needed if Israel was put in its place.
Right. So I mean, ultimately, do you think if you approach Israelis, do you think that they want as much aid as they get, today, Miko? What is, because people constantly refer to that, the amount of aid that leaves America to go to Israel, and people will talk about, the American economy is in shambles, we got to just stop all our foreign aid and all this. Is it all just about building a larger army, you think? We're talking about, just a conflict that's just dragged on, and so you would think, when does something stop? And this can kind of transition us into what's sort of next if you want to move into that realm. But can you talk a little bit about that, and then we can transition into that?
Well, half the foreign aid comes back here in arms sales, or just about half comes back here to the U.S. in arms sales. So a lot of that money is actually money that's being laundered back to the weapons arms industry. If I'm not mistaken, this is a few years ago, the Israeli defense budget was somewhere around $30 billion. So they're getting $3 billion out of that from the U.S., but every dollar that Israel gets from the U.S., for purchasing and so on, they have to add another dollar or two of their own in order to accommodate the weapons that they bought and train the soldiers and the pilots and so on. So it's really not about the money. If the money wasn't there, Israel would be fine. But having the option to get free money, who would say no? Who would say no to getting free, completely free money, free to the amount of 3? I think it's closer probably to 4. Plus you've got a whole bunch of other packages and NGOs that send money to Israel, so it's probably closer to $5 billion a year. No one's going to say no to that, out of the goodness of their heart. But the reality is that it's not needed, and it's used to build an army that's not necessary, and to support an entire policy, which is a brutal policy that terrorizes an entire nation.
I definitely agree with that, and I also think that it makes a bigger statement that we give the majority of our humanitarian aid to fund a military occupation. I think it destroys America's moral credibility in the world. There are billions of children starving around the world and living in poverty, and we could allocate those funds, and we can help a lot of other thriving economies we can help a lot of startup economies. So there's a lot that we could be doing with the money, but unfortunately we are giving it to fund to brutalize the indigenous population.
Right. So, I have an interesting question for both of you that I feel like, sometimes at least gets our speakers thinking. So, it's a quick question, and then it comes with a follow-up question. Miko, do you think that the Palestinian authorities, the representative governments of the Palestinian people, do you think that they're perfect?
That they're perfect?
Yeah, they're perfect. So yes,
I don't think.
it's a yes or no question. Just saying. No, okay.
Of course not. No.
And Mo, same, just quick question, yes or no to you.
Absolutely not.
So the whole idea is that people who watch this discussion, they're going to think, you guys are obviously, hammering Israel, but I think that they would want to know, ultimately, what immediate thing needs to take place on the Palestinian front to, what are they doing incorrectly that you can easily say needs to be totally adjusted in order for any sort of peaceful solution to take place. And I guess if you can nail down one item, sometimes I ask for, 2 or 3, but if you can just kind of give people who are from the pro-Israeli side, some perspective on some of the items which need to take place on the Palestinian front in order to foster peace. And Miko, why don't you go first?
Well, like I said earlier, the two are not analogous. You cannot compare. You cannot treat the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority by the same standards. They're not the same. One is a government that's keeping the other under its boot. There is no Palestinian government. There is no the Palestinian Authority. Like I said, has less authority than a city council, and everything they do has to get approval by the state of Israel. The Israeli army is stepping on it's got their boot on the Palestinians' neck. The vast majority of Palestinians who resist, Palestinians who are not willing to accept the Israeli narrative and domination, are either dead or in jail. And the PA are doing whatever they can. I mean, they don't represent Palestinians. That's, we have to say that as well. But the PA does not represent Palestinians. The PA represents a small group of Palestinians that happen to be in the West Bank. You've got millions of Palestinians in refugee camps. You've got Palestinians inside of Israel. You've got Palestinians in Gaza. They managed to reduce, Israel and Oslo has managed to reduce the entire Palestinian problem into the West Bank, which is an absurd proposition. So the two are not analogous in any way. You cannot compare one to the other. One is brutally oppressing the other. The Palestinian Authority, like I said, under very difficult conditions, is trying to do whatever they can in order to maintain some kind of a semblance of normality. But nobody in their right mind thinks that they are a government and can be held to the same standards as the Israeli government by any stretch of the imagination.
Right. And what's just interesting to hear when you say that is just you'll hear the president be on a worldwide platform and talk about them and have a complete opposite viewpoint on that, and ultimately that's why you're here and talking about this. But for those who will, let's say, listen to that speech, he'll reference the Palestinian Authority and say you have a peace partner here, and then yet you'll say on your end you're basically saying that they're really not a government whatsoever to be really put in the position to foster peace. Is that kind of correct?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying Israel is not a government that's willing to foster peace. It's the Palestinians who don't have a partner for peace. It's not the Israelis who don't have a partner for peace.
Okay.
I think we have to make this absolutely very clear. The Palestinians have done everything they possibly could. Everything they possibly could to foster peace. They accommodated, they made concessions, just by accepting the two-state solution. Just by accepting the two-state solution, which means a Palestinian state in the West Bank, in all of the West Bank, with East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. The Palestinians have already given up 80% of their homeland, and they were willing to recognize the state that destroyed their civilization, their culture, and their homeland. Right. So already, by agreeing to that, for Israel, this is not enough. Israel is not willing to make peace based on that. Israel wants the Palestinians to surrender completely, to accept minimal autonomy in small areas that are determined by Israel within the West Bank, and for that they want the Palestinians to sign a peace agreement. That's a surrender, and of course the Palestinians are not willing to do this, and I don't think they should.
Right. Mo, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah. like Miko said, I think it's a very big misconception that is painted through the media as well. When people think of Israel-Palestine, they think of Israel. They have their military, they have their governing bodies, they have a certain amount of power. And then you think Palestinians have an army, they have a government, they have this unregulated economy aside from Israel. But Israel is controlling 100% pretty much everything that goes on. They make sure that they're demilitarized. They make sure that the Palestinians are living under the conditions that they want them to live under. So who is in the position of power to make the peace happen? A population that isn't trapped in an open-air prison, that is constantly under the threat of attack, that has been attacked several times in the last few years, and throughout the occupied West Bank, where they're persecuted, they're humiliated daily, they're suffering, and a lot of them are non-violently protesting. So which population is more likely to step forward for peace, and who is in the position of power to make that peace treaty work? Palestinians, like Mika said, they don't have, they've compromised time and time again when they've come to negotiations. They've pretty much agreed to give up their homeland, and now we're talking about this two-state solution, which is very unrealistic now. It's already a one-state solution. It's in an apartheid state. So, I mean, there's not much more that the Palestinians can do besides wait for a counterpart in the peace negotiations.
Right. So I mean, just looking at the text chat, a lot of people want to hear, you guys talk about, peace and about solutions going forward. Because you guys are peace activists, and they want to really hear sort of your take on what happens next and what solutions can happen going forward to foster peace. And so could we maybe, since we've been speaking for almost an hour, can we sort of conclude on that item? Because I think a lot of people want to hear about that. And maybe, Miko, you can go first.
Sure. I think a realistic... And also, what is peace? I mean, people think that there's peace now because Israelis are perfectly happy. So, I mean, it all depends on what you mean peace and what your set of values, are. I would argue that the situation that exists on the ground today is unacceptable and has to be brought to an end. I think it has to be replaced by a real democracy. I think Israelis and Palestinians represent about half the population today anyway. I think by 2020 there'll be a Palestinian majority. I don't think there's any arguing about that. But in any case, Israel has to be transformed from this crazy notion of a Jewish state, where half the population is not Jewish at all, to a democracy that is not defined by its Jewishness or its Muslimness or any other religion, but just a democracy, where Israelis and Palestinians are completely equal. Now, I think it's important to clarify. When I talk about Israelis, I'm not talking about Jews. I don't think there's a right. I don't think Jewish people have any right to claim Palestine at all. The Israelis who are there are there. It's people like me. We're the children and grandchildren of colonizers and settlers. This is the reality. So there are about 6.5 million Israelis today. They're close to 6 million Palestinians. Like I said, that's probably going to change by 2020. There's very little argument about that. And there has to be a democracy that respects everybody's human rights, everybody's civil rights, respects the rights of the minority, whoever that might be, respects the rights of both nations to maintain their language and culture and heritage and so forth. And basically to change it from a binational state that is not a democracy to a binational state that is a democracy. That is what peace will look like. Then the two sides can move forward and will be able to create functioning democracy, a productive democracy, and move forward beyond this conflict. This is what I envision when I talk about peace.
And how achievable do you think that vision is? Do you think that's? I was just quickly going to ask Miko, like how achievable and realistic do you think that is right now? What sort of next steps need to take place in order for that to happen?
Well, I think I think if you talk to people who are active in the anti-apartheid movement with South Africa, they will tell you that 2 years before apartheid fell, if you said that apartheid would fall in 2 years, they'd put you in an asylum. They think you're out of your mind because apartheid would never fall. I think what needs to take place is already taking place. You've got the BDS movement that is growing stronger by the day. It's not where it could be yet, but it is getting stronger and more support. Everybody talks about BDS, whether they agree to it or not. You've got campuses all over North America, including Canada, with Students for Justice in Palestine and groups, other pro-Palestinian groups doing tremendous work. There are over 140 different campuses that hold Palestine awareness weeks and so forth. This is taking place. You've got the protests on the ground. You've got the discussion, the level of discussion being raised by programs like this and by other groups. You've got churches and trade unions and again, student organizations and other peace and justice groups talking about this issue all the time, far more openly than they have before. And the notion of a one democracy is something being brought up every single time. They're talking again about South Africa and what can be done. I only learned recently the state of Connecticut at the time passed a divestment resolution against apartheid, against South Africa, and I was talking to some of the activists who were involved with that. This was in the early 80s. It was a tough uphill battle. It wasn't something that was easy to do. People forget how many people in this country supported South African apartheid. It was a tough battle, but they got it done. I think it's important to, a lot of colleges are passing divestment resolutions. That's a good thing. I think that has to happen more and has to be encouraged. And anybody who believes and cares for peace and cares for Palestinians and cares for Israelis and wants to see peace in that region has to focus on the resistance and on the process that will bring an end to the Zionist domination of Palestine, which is only ruining the lives of Israelis and Palestinians, and allow for a real democracy to emerge in its place. So just like apartheid fell in South Africa, and Mubarak and other regimes fall as a result of a popular grassroots movement, this too has to happen, and this too can happen. I think it's very realistic.
And Mo?
There is not much that I disagree with what you said, and there's not much that I can add to it. You said the most important thing is to have a democracy that's not based on a religion. It has to be justice and complete equality. Israel needs to get rid of its discriminatory laws. Even since I believe 2011, about 31 laws passed through legislation have discriminated against Arab Israeli citizens, not just Palestinian legal residents in Gaza and the West Bank. They've discriminated against their own citizens. So it's not a true democracy, and I think the only way that there can be coexistence there is if it's a one-state solution, a binational state, and there could be some sort of parliament, and that would ensure that one majority over the other wouldn't control the interests of the country. And I mean, there's really not much more that I can say. It's not a simple situation, but I mean, that's the start of it. And with Zionism controlling it, there really is no hope. So I think we need leadership on the Israeli side to look out for the best interest of its Jewish and Arab population.
Great. So I guess what I would ask next is and now we've been speaking for almost an hour, so this has been great. Once again, thank you so much for joining us today. What I would really kind of ask last is what message would each of you like to send to the world for anyone who watches this video and is trying to get a better understanding of this conflict? What message would each of you like to send to those people? And Mo, you can go first, and then Miko, you can end it.
I think it's really important for the international community to really voice their opinion and be heard. And it's already somewhat of a popular movement, and they just really need to become more involved on campuses and pressure Congress. It's not going to be a quick fix, but it's the fact that I believe most humans believe in equality and justice, and just because somebody was born into oppression and born into occupation doesn't mean that it's right for you not to stand up for them. So vice versa in anyone else's positions, I think it's very important to stand up against any type of injustice, whether it's in Palestine, Israel, whether it's in Southeast Asia, South America, anywhere in the world. But obviously this is a very pressing issue that's been occupying the media and occupying people's thoughts for about 65 years now.
Right, and Miko?
Well, it's funny when you look at a map. And I often speak in front of audiences. I always like to ask them if they can find the place on the map, just to have a frame of reference who I'm talking to. You see Africa, you see the Arabian Peninsula, you see all of Western Asia, and then there's a tiny, tiny sliver of land that barely fits the entire name of Jerusalem on it, and that's the one place that everybody's talking about, which blows your mind, but that's the reality.
And that could be another whole discussion, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting. People talk about, was there a Palestine? Was there no Palestine? Do we recognize Palestine? Do we not recognize Palestine? I was at the University of Virginia last week, and I took a ride to see Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home. And as soon as you walk in, there's a massive map of Africa that his father drew. His father was a surveyor. And so I took a look to see just north of Africa, that strip of land on the coast just north of Africa. And surprise, surprise, it says Palestine all over it. The issue of whether there was a Palestine or there is a Palestine, do we recognize Palestine, is a silly conversation. There is a Palestine, there was a Palestine, and it needs to come back and be a Palestine. And I think it's important for people to realize that criticizing Israel and calling Israel to be transformed to democracy is not anti-Semitism. There's nothing inherently Jewish about the state of Israel. There's nothing inherently Jewish about Zionism. They proclaim themselves to be the representatives of the Jewish people. Nobody voted for them. And most Jews, I would argue, have never had an interest in Israel, will probably never be in Israel, go to Israel. And so there's nothing anti-Semitic, nothing bad about calling for the end of this racist regime, the Zionist regime. But it's important to be said. People have to say it. Just like when people talked about the end of apartheid in South Africa, it was very clear what they were talking about. We have to be clear here as well. The end game has to be a real democracy, and it has to be universal values, like Mo was saying, of freedom and equality and respecting human rights and civil rights, respecting minorities, respecting people's culture and heritage and language and so on, as people would like to live. And we're talking about two societies that are very similar. We're talking about two societies that have democratic traditions. Most Israelis are the descendants of Jews who came from Arab countries, Arab Jews. The majority of Israelis actually are Arabs. If they don't speak Hebrew today, then their parents and grandparents, Arabic, then their parents and grandparents speak. And they're very proud of the fact that they're Moroccans or Iraqis or Yemenites, and they'll say it, 3 generations later, and they'll still eat them Yemenite food or Algerian food or Libyan food, depending on where they came from. Arab Jews are very proud of who they are. So we're talking about very similar societies, and I think the transition, I'm not suggesting it's going to be easy, will be a very positive one. And I think that this is the future. This is how it's going to end, and this is how it's going to end in a way that will benefit everyone.
Great. Great. All right, so, Miko and Mo, I'm so happy we were able to pull this off under this short notice, and speaking to both of you late last night on my time, but we were able to get it done. So, it's great that we were able to get some people in here to listen, and, thank you so much for both of you joining me here today and being on Vonvo.com, and, both of you have a safe travel because you guys are leaving to go to your respective destinations, and thanks so much for joining us, and we'll hopefully have you back on again. This was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Max. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
All right, great.
See you later, Mo.
Let's get coffee soon.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, guys.